So my experience of recovery has been working in recovery for more than 15 years at a state level in the coordination of recovery operations for a range of disasters over those 15 years. And in particular, I've had roles in disaster welfare and evacuation centres and coordinating community recovery. And certainly in the last major disasters that I was involved in, which was the 2019-2020 bushfires, I was responsible for coordinating community recovery across 33 council areas, which involves sending teams in to work alongside and support councils to do their work in recovery, and also to establish the recovery support services for people affected by the fires. There's three things that I would say to my pre-disaster self. The first of those is don't underestimate the complexity of recovery. The second is trust the recovery principles. And the third is learn from good practice. And I'll elaborate on each of those. Don't estimate the complexity of disaster recovery. The coordination of recovery at any level of government, and in particular at a state level, is incredibly political. It's a relentless stream of complex and wicked problems and competing priorities. And all of this is in a highly emotive environment where people are probably facing the most catastrophic and life-changing event of their lives, and they are in shock and deep grief. I don't think there's a more complex environment that anyone can work in alongside working in recovery. So that being said, trusting the National Recovery Principles for me has been a really important anchor point. They were developed a number of years ago now, and most recently revised in 2018. And the principles still stand. It's the principles of understanding the complexity, understanding the context of community recovery, putting community at the centre, and also the importance of coordination and communication. And so my advice to myself is when you're working in that incredibly complex and ever-changing landscape of recovery, if you anchor back to those principles, it does provide a framework for you to walk through as you're really dealing with some of the most complex and wicked problems that anyone ever faces. And the third thing that I would advise my pre-disaster self is to learn from the good practice. And we're incredibly lucky at this point in recovery in Australia, because there's been a lot of good practice now, a lot of good practice that has demonstrated its effectiveness and success and has been evaluated. We don't need to be reinventing the wheel every time we have a new disaster. And it's really important that we look and learn from what has been done before and where that has worked. And then, tailoring that to our new environments and the new challenges we face in any particular event, because as we know, all events are different. I think one of the complexities that we face in terms of working in recovery, particularly at a state level, because you are holding the whole view from the state imperatives and the political agendas, and the political agendas that are coming often from the best places of wanting to do good for the community, but managing the complexities of what is happening right up at a state level to walking with and working alongside those at the community level as well, and managing the bridge between the two can be really difficult and complex. And I think that one of the things that's most important is that you recognise that link and you recognise that bridge that you need to be constantly walking up and down. And then in terms of the recovery environments, the 4 recovery environments that we work within in terms of the natural environment, the economic, the infrastructure and health and well-being, it's really important to remember the interconnectedness of those environments. Often in government, we like to silo things neatly into particular working groups, and each working group has its own action plan, an own list of agenda items to do with a particular environment. We need to constantly be looking for the interconnectedness between the different environments, the interconnectedness of the recovery strategies that we're working with, to make sure that we are always working towards a holistic view of recovery, a holistic view of the needs of the community, and a holistic strategy to assisting the community. I think that there are a couple of things that I would say that have absolutely stood out for me the most over the years of working in recovery. And the first is what it takes to be a good leader in recovery. And that's 3 things. To be a good leader in recovery, you need to be a listener, you need to be a collaborator, and you need to be an enabler. And an enabler that enables the organisations that are part of a community infrastructure. So the councils, the businesses, the community services organisations, that enabling them to do the work that they need to do in this recovery environment, which is the work that they do every day with an overlay of the complexity of recovery. And that's what enabling community recovery means for me, and is really important to me. The second thing that I think is incredibly important is that recovery is as important as response. It's not always been reflected that way in our emergency management arrangements, and certainly not in our planning or in our exercising. But recovery is more complex, it's more expensive, and it takes longer. And so planning for recovery and exercising recovery is absolutely critical and going forward. And the last thing that I would say, sometimes people have said to me, well, how will you know when we get there? And one of the indications for me that as an emergency management committee that we are moving along the path of really recognising recovery in the same way that we recognise response, and the need for planning and exercising in response is the same for planning and exercising in recovery. I think we'll know that we're on that path when we start to have conversations with each other along the lines of, gee, do you remember when we didn't exercise recovery, or we didn't plan for recovery? And we'll be a bit bemused by that, because it will seem so odd in our current context and our current understanding of how important planning and exercising for recovery is. Supporting a team in recovery has got to be one of the most important parts of being a leader in recovery, and looking after a team, both for their own self-preservation and protection, and also to enable them to do the best job that they can do, has to be one of the biggest priorities for any recovery leader. And I think that my learnings have been, don't assume it's just going to happen organically, because it doesn't, not because of best intentions, but because of the absolute relentless demand of competing priorities and demands for services that you're under at that time. So part of looking after your team is right at the outset putting in some structures that will remind you and provide a safe structure and regular opportunity for team members to come together to talk about how they're going, both in a team environment and also on a one-to-one. So we've often had strategies like buddies for people, or mentors for people, as well as broader opportunities for team members to come together. And it's two different types of meetings. You'll have a team meeting to talk about the business, but you also need to have meetings to talk about how people are travelling. And one of the things that I often say to the people that are working in recovery is many of us are very familiar with the types of responses and emotions that a disaster-affected person goes through when they are affected by a disaster. And in many ways, for people working in recovery, to a different degree and a different perspective, but they are also affected by that recovery as well, and they will experience a range of emotions relating to that as well, and go on that same trajectory from optimism about we're going to be able to fix this, to feeling completely exhausted and hopeless, to feeling frustrated and angry, and then to feeling that we're getting some rungs on the board and putting some strategies in place. And of course, none of that's linear, and you'll go round in a circle and up and down and back 5 steps and forward 2. But I do think it's very important that people who are working in recovery understand the impact of what that could mean for them, and us understand that we are all human, and we all react and connect with each other and other humans, and the trauma that we might be facing in a disaster-affected community.